And there we are. This hangout is live, and we are here to have an author chat as part of the Inclusive Learning Network book study, summer book study. We are chatting with the authors of Dive Into UDL, and we'll introduce Kendra and Luis. Kendra, why don't you introduce yourself first?
Hi, Helen. How are you doing?
Very good, thanks.
I'm Kendra Grant. I am an educator for many years and an instructional designer with a focus on universal design for learning, which is why we have this book. Luis?
And I'm Luis Perez. I'm currently a technical assistant specialist at the National Center on Accessible Educational Materials, which is a mouthful, so we just say the National AIM Center, AEM, at CAST. And before that, I was a consultant for a number of years, like Kendra, specializing on universal design for learning. I also did a lot of work on mobile learning and assistive technology, both in K-12 and higher ed.
Awesome. It's so good to have a chance to chat to both of you. We've been reading the book, broke it down over the course of the last 4 weeks, and I know that it's summertime and reading sometimes is not the priority, but we've had a number of participants in the book study who have been doing some of the activities. Nice to see there was a contribution to the Flipgrid. Somebody dived in and tried that out. Some tweets and some activities. People have been making some things from the book. Is there anything that over the last 4 weeks that just caught your attention and said, yeah, that'd be worth following up with somebody or having a bigger conversation about?
Well, I'll mention I did respond to the Flipgrid today, and that was Hillary, who put in a comment into the Flipgrid, and I think she raises an important point, which is there's a lot of connection between UDL and culturally responsive teaching. And one of the things that I've been exploring for learning for work, if you will, is the idea of stereotype threat. And that's the idea that sometimes when you're in a situation where you're expected to perform, the fact that you're a part of a group and kind of influences your performance because you're thinking about the stereotypes associated with that group. So think about, women in math is an example that's often used. Students from minority groups, when they go into a standardized test and so on, there's always that kind of balloon hanging over you where you're afraid that you're going to confirm or, live up to a stereotype, and that can influence performance. So that is something that comes into play in our classrooms where we have, students from underrepresented groups, and they kind of come in with those kinds of expectations. And I think it ties into UDL and that principle of multiple means of engagement and the environment and the threats that can be in the environment. And I think a lot of times we think about what's most obvious, which is the threats that we can see, the barriers that we can see, but we also need to consider those that we can't see. And, trauma is another one. Stigma is another one. And I think we need to do a lot more work in those areas because they're not as easy to get at.
Yeah, good points for sure. I think there is that connection, absolutely. And I think Helen and I, both being from Ontario, we've had a lot of focus on that from our Ministry of Education, I think, over the past year. So I think it is something that needs to be more visible for sure. For me, what I thought about looking at, I really liked all the people who were creating images, because that's something I like to do. So I saw a lot of people trying their hand at that on Twitter. Some of them got retweeted as well, which was really nice to see. And it's always fun when it's your first time doing that people respond, right? It gives you that, impetus to try it again. And then there was James Northridge. I was just looking up because he was saying that he was interested and saw all these tweets going out about the UDL and about the book. And he's in Cork, Ireland. So I offered to send him a book. And maybe, Luis, you and I can go to Cork, Ireland one time. You never know. I've only landed in the airport.
I've been in Cork because a number of years ago, I went to an Apple Institute there. And it was wonderful. I think we lucked out. It was one of the few days where it wasn't raining, and it's a wonderful city. So I would definitely be up for another trip to Cork.
Sounds like a plan. So James, if you're listening, reach out.
Absolutely.
So is there anything from the book itself that you'd like to highlight for the book study participants, or for those that may catch this from whatever part of the world they're in?
Can I go first there, Louise? Okay.
Go for it.
So for me, one of the things is that ownership of your own learning as a professional, I think for me is why we went back and forth on where to put that. And for me, that's that first piece of, if we model it ourselves, and we've got images of that on the website and in the book, if we model that ourselves, then our students are more likely to be modeling that ownership and really taking chances and taking risks. So we sometimes tell our students to do that. If we look at the ISTE standards, it's all through that. Yet we as teachers sometimes it's harder for us to maybe make those changes or take those risks. So that was the one thing. And the other was around the assumptions and beliefs. And I think what Louise just talked about, it ties into that. It's all of those things that we just move up that ladder of inference very quickly about ourselves, about our learners, about the parents, all of those things. And I think it's taking that time to really think about what are those assumptions you're making, and then that ties into how you instruct and how people learn. And if the book does anything for people, it's about that, about getting them to think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely agree with that. And just to give people a little bit of background on how the book came about, a number of years ago, as part of the ISTE Inclusive Learning Network, Kendra and I and Betsy Dalton, who's also active with the Inclusive Learning Network, the three of us developed an online course, which we call the SUC, a small supported, and I always forget the third S, so help me out, small supported.
Short, supported, social. Oh, and I'm forgetting too. There's lots of S's in there.
Open online course, but it was a variation on the MOOC, but with a lot more of a social component to it, in the sense that people submitted their assignments and they got a lot of feedback. It was very interactive, but also to tie back into what Kendra mentioned about modeling, we were not the instructors. We were the co-learners. And so throughout the course, we did the assignments and we got feedback from other people in the course, and we provided feedback. So it's really about more building a community of learning rather than the traditional sort of you sit there and you kind of sit and get. So if we do one thing with the book, that's what we hope to do, is to disrupt that kind of model of instruction. Where it just goes in one direction, right? Like you're filling a bucket. Instead of doing that, what we want is more like a wheel, where everybody's sort of a spoke on that wheel. And, it doesn't really, well, it's not a good analogy, because in the wheel, there's something in the middle. But a mesh, if you will, or a spider web, where it's really about the connections that you make. Because a big part of learning is social. And that's what encourages, I think, to think about that and the importance of modeling as an important component of creating an inclusive learning environment.
And that's also where we met Helen, right?
I was just going to say, I'll jump in and say it was definitely a trigger for me, and that's how I got involved with the Inclusive Learning Network and met both of you.
Well, we're glad to have you, and we really thank you for putting together this book study and everything that you contribute to the Inclusive Learning Network.
Thank you, Louise. So some highlights or just, next steps for those who have dipped in or dived into the book. If there's something you could suggest that they do as a next step for their own professional growth.
Well, I think I'll address again, Hillary in her Flipgrid response mentioned the whack-a-mole. And Kendra, you created an awesome graphic for that. And the idea is that sometimes with education, we take a whack-a-mole approach, where an initiative pops up and we pay attention to it. And then after a while, we kind of, hit the mole and it goes kind of under the surface. So instead of thinking about like, well, I'm going to implement this and this and that, really what we want more is a shift in mindset and a shift in learning culture, because it's like when you go into the water, there's more to it than what you see at the surface, right? There's these currents underneath. And if you don't pay attention, those currents can take you in the wrong direction. So it's important to just kind of, part of diving in is really a change in mindset and a change in culture. That's not at the surface level of just, an individual practice. And a quote that Mindy Johnson shared with me that's really kind of taking hold with me, and it stands out, is from our famous poet here, Maya Angelou. And it's basically, until you, and of course, I'm going to get it wrong because I'm live on here, so I may have to look it up. But it's basically, do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. And so the reason why I point that out is because with something like UDL, learning is complex, the brain is complex, and it can become overwhelming. But if you take that approach that like every day you're going to do something new or something different that will improve learning, and if you change your mindset, then I think that's going to be just as important as like any individual technique or approach. So that's my takeaway anyway for my own learning.
I think for me is don't keep it a secret. So we tend to be, again, fairly siloed sometimes. And I think like share it with the learners, share it with your students, whatever the age of they are, share it with parents, share it with everybody and get talking about it, because it is something that you want everyone involved in. And I think students will see the value in it as well. Get them talking about the way they learn and all of those things. And I think if they take that home to family as well, it starts to shift the message everywhere and not just what happens in your class. And hopefully work with another person. I used to be a teacher librarian or a library media specialist, and it was working with everybody that kind of moves your learning forward. So I think that would be spreading the message. And then the other thing is we also have our, and I'm losing the name of our the guide we have, UDL guide, is it the UDL planning guide? So
UDL planning guide, yes.
Yeah, so we have that online as well for you. And what I like about that is you really can take a look, and you don't have to do everything. It's not a checklist. It's not like you have to do this, but sometimes you go, where do I start? Or what should I do? Or what resonates with me? And so really going in there and taking a look at that might give you some ideas of where to start. And for me, I really like the area of the self-regulation, and that would be my particular area. But you may say, you know what, I really want to look at inquiry because we're looking at project-based learning, or we're looking at STEM or STEAM. So again, it's just really about where you want to start. And again, we talk about what level you're at. So it's okay to be wading in. That's perfectly acceptable. And model that for your students again.
And you can always you could be at the wade in level on one aspect of universal design for learning, and you could be at the deep dive on another aspect. That's the way learning works, right? It's not across the board you're all wade in, and not across the board you're all deep dive. You could be at different levels depending on what you're studying, what the task is. So be kind to yourself.
Yeah. Now I know that I've linked from the book study website, I've linked to your support website. Is there anything that you'd like to mention to any of the book study participants about the support that they have at the back end for the book?
Well, I would say, Kendra is, so again, to highlight what Kendra just said about working with another person, one of the reasons why we work well together is we balance each other out very well. And when you find somebody like that, it really leads to a great, relationship, because Kendra is really visual. She likes to do the visuals, and I don't have that kind of skill. But also, she focuses a lot on, the self-regulation, and I focus a lot on the accessibility part of it. Mm-hmm. And so those are sort of two different ends of the UDL spectrum, but they're both necessary. So the accessibility piece, it kind of creates the conditions for learning. It's that entry point which allows, you know, every learner to kind of enter the learning, but that's not enough by itself. It's necessary, but not sufficient. And then at the other end, we have, you know, what we know as the expert learner, somebody who's self-regulated, self-motivated, has really good executive functioning. So the goal is, how do we provide those conditions that, you know, allow everybody to reach that level of being an expert learner. So I couldn't do it all by myself. Kendra couldn't do it all by herself, but working together, you know, we can create a website where we have some really nice visuals, but also we've tried to make them accessible and model that for you. So in addition to taking away the content of, you know, learning about UDL, we hope that you take away that emphasis on accessibility and instructional design, sound instructional design as well.
And I think that what we try to do too is, you know, we had a print-based book and we said, well, that's a bit of an antithesis of what we were trying to do. So that's why we created the website, to have those multiple representations. And that was really important for both of us, for sure. And so what I think, if you've read the book, is we tried to go into each chapter and summarize it in a little bit different way. So if you go into the website, you'll see everything's there, each chapter, each section. And so maybe if something didn't resonate with you in the book, it might resonate with you when you read the chapter. And then below, we actually have, again, the wade in, shallow swim, and a deep dive, just some small things that you might want to do. The other thing is we added different images in here. We also have like a book images section that are, so if you can't see the images in the book, they're there as well. So the other thing with that for me is they're great talking points. If you have to present to someone or you want to start a conversation, sometimes those images, like the whack-a-mole, which I think that's chapter 7, the UDL whack-a-mole image. It's just a great way to get conversations started about what does that mean and do we do that? And I think that what I like about the website is that, giving you that accessibility. You can use it whether you're working with students or whether you're working with teachers or whether you're working with pre-service teachers. You can use it in all different sorts of ways to kind of get conversations started. And then, hey, here's the next step. Take a look at this one video or this one PDF rather than trying to take on the whole world of what's out there about UDL.
Awesome, awesome. And just any final thoughts that you'd like to share with the folks from the book study or other ones that is, I believe there's a second book study coming up with another ISTE network.
This will be with AT Chat. So AT Chat is, again, you know, emphasizing the social nature of learning these days. It's a Twitter chat that happens every Wednesday at 8 o'clock for an hour. So if you follow that hashtag AT Chat, they're currently doing a book study on our good friend Christopher Bugage's book on assistive technology. And we actually presented with Chris at ISTE on both of our books. He's also an ISTE author. And so that seems to be going pretty well. And then in the month of August, they'll be doing a book study on this book, but it's a little bit different in the sense that it's through Twitter and it's also a slow chat. So it's every week, one question, and you get to focus on that one question. And then the following week, you move on to the next one. So check that out. I mean, it's available 24/7. All you have to do is follow that hashtag.
Yeah, so for those folks who just dipped into this book study, they can continue in the month of August as well. So lots of summertime fun.
And I'd say too is Louise and I, reach out to us anytime. You can go through our Twitter handle. You can do hashtag dive into UDL. And we will answer you. So if you have a question or you want us to answer something, I had someone DM me about the work they were doing at a university with pre-service teachers. So anytime, definitely reach out. And thank you to everybody who did participate. When it's lovely weather, especially for us up here in the north. Louise, you don't count because you have nice weather all year. When we get our 1 month of Florida weather, you know, it's hard to be reading a book and participating. So thank you for everyone who did, and anybody who participates after.
Excellent. And thank you for taking time out to have this chat with us. I really appreciate it too.
Thank you.
And thank you, Helen, for doing this.
Appreciate it.